This is Kevin Sullivan, and I demand you to listen to WGE Weekly with Steve and Scum.
All right, everybody, we are back. Hey there, all you bloodthirsty, savage fans of classic pro wrestling. Welcome to Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly with Steve and the Scum. My name is Steve, and alongside me, as usual, is the Scum. Part 2 of JJ Dillon this week. And next week, man, I cannot wait for this. He was really personable and funny as hell, and it's a great interview. So we're going to have Mr. Wonderful next week, Scum. How you doing today, my brother?
Not much going on here, Steve. The usual, just itching in anticipation with these next few shows down the home stretch, as I like to say, for Season 2 of WGD Weekly. We got a fantastic part 2 with James J. Dillon, the leader of the Four Horsemen, Pro Wrestling Hall of Famer and WWE Hall of Famer. We also have a very special clip that will be coming here soon, an abbreviated, so to speak, interview to start things off with the legendary Iron Sheik. As I speak with you right now, Steve, and like I like to say, it is always a pleasure to be back here on Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly with you, my longtime tag team partner. I guess you would be the equivalent this week to, and please don't start singing, to Nikolai Volkov. As I speak with you, I'm sitting here swinging those big heavy clubs over my head in anticipation for the legendary Iron Sheik.
Iran #1, Russia #1, USA. You gotta love the Iron Sheik. Only man I've ever seen on live television spit on a caged turkey. Some fantastic stuff there. Always the crazy man. Always has something to say, and like you said in our prior show, a social media nightmare, but always entertaining to read. Great stuff there from the Iron Sheik, and a great list of names appear in that movie saying nothing but great stuff about him as well, Scum. The Hall of Famer Iron Sheik. Iron Sheik, the movie, is out, so check your local listings where you can find that, Scum. Some really cool stuff there. And you know, man, I really can't wait to watch that movie as well.
Yeah, Steve, absolutely. I was shocked when I heard some of the names that were on board, and I think everyone else is. I believe that the Sheik's management that also spoke with us during the interview alluded to that people are going to be kind of surprised and have noted their surprise with some of the huge names, just superstar names that are on board for this movie venture with the Sheik, the new documentary. So I'd say without further ado, why don't we take the listeners on a walk down the aisle and bring them the phone lines lighting up from Tehran, Iran, and our conversation with the legendary Iron Sheik.
All right, everybody, we have a very, very special guest joining us today. The Iron Sheik is here alongside his friend and manager, Jan. They are going to join us here in just a second to talk about his new movie, The Iron Sheik, the movie, of course, former WWE Heavyweight Champion, WWE Hall of Famer, probably the best induction speech of all time with the Iron Sheik. So who knows what we're in for. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us. Tell us a little bit about how the movie promotion is going. And Sheik, you have such a diverse career. We'd have to ask you a couple of questions about it. Talk us through working as the bodyguard for the Shah of Iran.
Oh, I'm fortunate to have two excellent agents make about the Iron Sheik movie and movie Sheik show, and everything is excellent so far, and I'm very happy.
Very good, very good. Well, we appreciate it. We can't wait to check out the movie, and a couple points that you touch on in the documentary. Also, after your time in the Olympics when you were the bodyguard for the Shah, could you recall that for us quickly?
Yeah, and that time I was work for a national Iranian television station, and at the same time I was bodyguard for his son Reza and Farahnaz and his wife Farah Pahlavi, and was after my army.
So just to clarify, the Sheik was the Shah's bodyguard in Iran in the 60s, and he protected him and his wife, the Queen, as well as their children, and wherever they went, the Sheik went, and he was always in the line of fire and in the line of danger, but he protected them and took care of business.
Sure. Can't wait for the movie to come out, like we said. Part of it that was talked on there was about the start of Hulkamania, and we like to say, Steve and myself, you know, that without an Iron Sheik, that wouldn't happen. So could you talk to that briefly?
Absolutely, because 6 years nobody beat Mr. Bob Backlund. I beat him, the most famous arena in the world, Madison Square Garden, New York, and all of a sudden Hulk Hogan come, and which is I make the Hulk Hogan to be Hulkamania, because for me, it was not from Iron Sheik, no Hulkamania. And as a matter of fact, that match was in the Madison Square Garden too. So everybody know Iron Sheik and Hulk Hogan for a long time.
You know, Sheik, you're absolutely right. It was many, many years Bob Backlund held the title, and you came along and were able to beat him for that. Now, it took almost 8 years for you to compile all the information for this movie. You must be excited for its release.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very excited, sir, and this is about my life, and Sheik movie, and one of the best, and I watch it, and they're going to be one of the best movie, and I'm very happy because the two brother twins, they're doing excellent job, Megan boys, and so far everybody like it, and I'm looking forward to be one of the best movie in the about my life from Iran and America and around the world. They're doing excellent job so far.
Well, Sheik, us over at Wrestling's Glory Days, we have thousands of fans and followers that are certainly behind you and going to check out the movie, and we're going to do everything we can to promote it. And seeing the trailer and some of the names that were in there, some of your wrestling peers also just speaking highly of you. Just wanted to get your take on a couple of them that spoke in the documentary. What did you think about the kind words that The Rock had to say about you?
Oh, The Rock was excellent, and Jim Ross and Nick Foley and all of them, Dusty Rhodes, all of them was excellent, and especially Rock, he will talk about Drew from Iron Sheik, and he know he took the jabroni from Iron Sheik. I was telling that jabroni to the people, he take it from Iron Sheik, but he's a great performer, great movie star, and I'm very, I have a lot of respect for him and his father and mother.
Guys, just a little bit of a spoiler here. You know, in the documentary, you might be surprised that The Rock was in the trailer. A lot of people were like, whoa, when they saw The Rock. The reality is that the Sheik's family and the Johnsons go back many, many years, and the Sheik's wife, Carol Vaziri, actually used to babysit Dwayne when Rocky Johnson and the Sheik would hit the roads in Mid-Atlantic.
Wow.
And in actuality, the Rock in the documentary, and you'll love this part, he gives the Sheik full credit for the creation and the use of the word jabroni.
Very good.
That is fantastic.
I'm not making that up. That's not hyperbole from a promoter. You know, I'm telling you, you'll hear it from when you watch the doc. The Rock literally says, you know, without the Sheik, he would not have coined the phrase jabroni.
That is fantastic. Yeah, just a lot of great names that were in there. Saw Jake Roberts in the trailer. Again, just speaking to. I think everybody has nothing but respect, and we certainly wish you the best with the movie coming out. We can't wait to see it. I guess, Sheik, if we could, if you wanted to get a message out there to all your fans and all the people that have supported you over the years.
Oh, absolutely. I want to say thank you for you guys and all my wrestling friends and movie friends, and God bless you guys, and thanks to talk to me. And I want to say hello to all my wrestling friends and movie friends.
Oh, that's excellent, Sheik. You got 1 billion fans out there that love you and can't wait to see your new movie coming out. The Iron Sheik, the movie, is coming out here very, very soon. Check your local listings for that. Sheik, we wanted to wrap up. We had one more question for you. Not too long ago, they had, of course, WrestleMania weekend and the Hall of Fame induction ceremonies. Some pretty big names went in this time. Scott Hall, Ultimate Warrior, Jake the Snake Roberts. You mentioned Jake the Snake, so let's start with him. What do you think about Jake the Snake finally getting into the Hall of Fame?
Well, Jake the Snake comes from wrestling background. His father, Grizzly Smith, was a wrestler. Jake was a good performer. But also Jake was a little bit bad too, like Iron Sheik for the drugs. But he's okay now. Everything is okay, and we're sober. I think he deserves to be one of the Hall of Fame, like Mr. T or Paul Berry and they're okay, except that.
I don't want to jump in here just for 1 second. You know, he mentions, you know, Jake the Snake and his drug addiction. You know, the Sheik, just like Jake is now fully sober. You know, he drinks a couple beers here and there, but his biggest championship to date is the fact that he's conquered drug addiction. Just for you guys to know that's a big part of the documentary, and it's a big part of how it got released. Is that over the years he was using, and we couldn't finish the doc without it having a happy ending. And now we can truly say with the Twitter and with just where Sheik's at in his life, it's finally a happy ending.
Certainly his biggest championship to date. Very good stuff there. Congratulations to the Sheik on being sober and being a Twitter superstar like you mentioned on social media. Now, one last question. It was WrestleMania weekend not too long ago. Sheik, you were part of the first WrestleMania ever. Did you have a chance to sit down and watch WrestleMania?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was in New York, and I saw the from pay-per-view. It was excellent. All the matches was good, and was shocking for me, and for everybody to the Undertaker get beat. But all the matches, everything was excellent.
Yeah, agreed on that. And we couldn't be prouder of you to hear that either. What we were just told about you conquering those addictions. That is the biggest championship that you ever won, and we appreciate that. And I'm sure all the fans listening in are very happy to hear that, and they're behind you 100% and can't wait to see the movie.
The Sheik's movie is available on digital download. You can pre-order, and this is not a big budget film that's been by a big production company. This is all independent, and it's raw, and it covers everything. And this is all over the years of accumulation of the Sheik's life. And if the fans can support the Sheik, this is going to him. This is going to the legend.
Break Your Back, Make You Humble. The Story of the Iron Sheik is the name of the movie. You can catch that at sheikmovie.com for a low price of $9.99. It's a great deal. Check out some good stuff about the Iron Sheik. Of course, all those superstars we talked about earlier, Jim Ross, Jake the Snake Roberts, and of course The Rock in the movie. Great stuff there. It's been out for about a month with some great success, so we wanted to just congratulate you once again, Sheik. Thanks so much for being on our show to promote your movie.
Yes, sir. Thanks again, and God bless you guys, and have a good day.
Scum, it's interviews like that really make me happy to have this show and be on the show with you, man. WGD Weekly with Steven the Scum coming through again with a legend, the Iron Sheik. Be sure to check out his movie, The Iron Sheik, the movie like we just talked about there on the show. $10. We've all spent $10 on much worse, and it all goes to him, man, and he deserves it. So good stuff there. Scum, we got JJ Dillon coming down the pike too, man. Looking forward to part 2 of a great interview with a legend of wrestling.
Absolutely, Steve. I'd have to apologize to you here. I couldn't really hear you that good. I'm not sure what you were talking about, but I'd say we ought to get into JJ. Let me loosen this thing. I have one of those headdresses on with the band around it. I was running today for that first interview as the Ayatollah Scum. So I apologize for not hearing you that well, but I'd say I'm hoping what you were saying is we ought to get back into JJ Dillon. So part 2 of his interview, certainly not going to disappoint. Special thanks to the Iron Sheik and his management for coming on and joining us on the show. Always welcome back. What an entertaining, what a thrill, I know, for both yourself and me to have the Sheik join us, even in an abbreviated fashion. But yeah, JJ Dillon, right back to his timeline, as we like to call it. Just incredible stuff. Can't wait to get back into that. Like we've been saying, just so many things happening here in the world of Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly. Next week, Mr. Wonderful, the Russian Nightmare, the Sullivan Cornette Show, I think, is one of the most anticipated programs that we'll have coming forward. Just all these other stuff that we'll talk to you about after the interview. But really, I'm sitting there with bated breath here, waiting to hear more from JJ, Steve.
As am I, Scum. Very excited for part 2 with JJ Dillon, and I'm sure Scum Nation is too. So without further ado, let's get right down to it. Part 2 with legend JJ Dillon.
This is Hall of Famer Ron Simmons, and you're listening to WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum.
All right, we're back with JJ Dillon for part 2 of his interview. We left off talking about Ric Flair and JJ working with Ronnie Garvin, who is a real tough son of a gun, and having had an opportunity to interview him ourselves, he seems like a really down-to-earth, all-business guy, kind of a funny character to have play those female roles. But he's certainly one heck of a guy.
And a great performer, too.
Now, we wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of the Four Horsemen. Of course, so many different members of the Four Horsemen, but the original lineup of yourself, Ric Flair, Ole and Arn Anderson, and Tully Blanchard. Ole heads out for a little bit. According to some of our sources that we had on our show, Tully and Lex, he talked about how Ole wanted to go back and spend some time with his family. His son was growing up, and he wanted to watch him in his amateur wrestling career. Lex Luger comes into the picture. After that, it was Barry Windham, and down the road, so many other incarnations of the Four Horsemen. So tell us, JJ, from your perspective, what was your favorite lineup of the Four Horsemen?
Well, virtually every interview that I've ever done, that's a standard question that I always get about what was my favorite grouping of the Four Horsemen. And I always felt that the first group was special with Ole, because had that group not come together, since it was a spontaneous thing, then maybe none of the rest would have ever followed it. And so because that was the original grouping, and there was really only one picture of us all taken together, and that's the famous picture that, and we're not even sure where that picture was shot, where we're standing there and we got our hands all stacked up. But the thing about Ole, and another thing that we did too, is we took things from real life and wove them through what people saw on television. And at the time, Ole, his son was, I think, a senior in high school, and he was wrestling as an amateur and doing well in a lot of state tournaments. And Ole wanted to take some days off to go see his son wrestle, which was reasonable. And again, we weren't all in one match every night, but when you looked at the group, Flair kind of set the tone with the limousine ride and jet flying, kiss stealing son of a gun, and certainly Tully, could fit into that image. Arn, okay, you could accept that with Arn, and it, I kind of was like a chameleon that could almost fit into any situation. But with Ole, he was late in his career. And Ole was always the grumpy, cantankerous one that if there was one person who you looked at him and said, okay, now which one of these guys is not the limousine riding, jet stealing, limousine, jet flying, kiss stealing son of a gun, everybody would have looked at Ole. So when Ole wanted that time off, it created a scenario where Tully went out there, one day, and it was, Tully was always the natural heel all through the whole time with all of us. They kind of loved to hate us after a while, but they never really accepted Tully just because, whether it was his personality or what, he was just very good at what he does. Tully was a natural heel. And so Tully, on an interview, looks at Ole one time and says, now, with him taking off, and he said, well, what's more important, the Horseman or your brat kid? And, of course, what's any father going to do when somebody makes a statement like that? He turned around and slapped Tully. and that's all it was at first, was a slap. And then we'll get between everybody. And, of course, this happened on TBS, and the announcers said, oh, there's unrest with the Horsemen. Oh, my God, things are falling apart. And, of course, they were speculating. And then I came out right towards the end of the show, very confident, very much in charge of everything. And I said, look, this is, you're making a big thing out of nothing. I said, these are like thoroughbred horses. They're very high strung, they're, and they kind of need they need the right person to hold them together. And that's my job. And that's what I do. And I said, Ole, in just a moment of being upset, did something that he shouldn't. And all he has to do is just come out here, apologize, and I will take care of everything and smooth this over. And, of course, it's near the end of the show. And I said, I know Ole's still here. Ole, just come out and apologize, and hey, I'll take care of everything. Like it was nothing. And, of course, now I'm there with egg on my face because no Ole. And, of course, David Crockett and Tony are really enjoying this. Now the show is about to wind down, and I'm saying, well, Ole, what do Ole, when you put me on the spot here, come on out here. I know you're here. And then I looked at them and I said, I know we're almost out of time, but the news can wait. This show stays on the air. I'm buying the time. And then finally here comes Ole. And, it's like the big sigh of relief. Oh, he's coming out to apologize. Everything is going to be all right. And Ole came up to me, and I don't remember what the verbal exchange was, but Ole turned around. Oh, you want me to apologize? Yes, of course I'm going to take care of everything. Oh, well, you're going to take care of everything? Okay. Wham! He whacked me, and down I go. And then Tully came out of nowhere, blindsided Ole, and off they went flying off of the set. The camera follows them off the set. They're going to Fist City. Now they're back where all the chairs and curtains and the set were, and we're out of time, we're off the air. And the people looked at it and said, hey, that wasn't supposed to happen, and we weren't supposed to see that. And so that then got Ole out of the group. Meanwhile, Luger had been down in Florida, got crossways with Bruiser Brody, couldn't stay there. And I guess Eddie Graham had talked to Crockett and said, here's a guy who's very green and got a fantastic body. And Jimmy said, okay, we'll take him. And it said, okay, here's a spot that we were established by then. We could slide Luger in now as our new secret weapon and be able, with the ability of the rest of us, to camouflage the fact that he didn't have experience, that he was real green. And it also then moved Ole across the ring as an opponent that gave us a fresh opponent, because Ole drew money no matter where he was. He wrestled the same, talked the same, so that freshened that part of it up. And we ended up having a really, really great run with Luger. And then finally Luger, it was like he then started having, I know there was a battle royal or something where the winner of the battle royal got something, and everybody eliminated themselves, and it was kind of like a little plum they were going to throw to me, and it ended up that Luger took and dumped me over the top rope to win the thing. And so there were subtle seeds along the way, but we never really tipped it. And then I think it was in Miami, we beat him up one night, and there was a match where Barry, again, it was never telegraphed, was on the other side, and all of a sudden Barry stepped in. And so as I look back, Ole was special because he was an original, and maybe none of the rest of it would ever happen without him. In terms of my favorite group, the group that was inducted in the WWE Hall of Fame with Barry, from bell to bell, was the best group ever, because Barry had the size, he had the youth, he had the good looks, the athleticism, and could do anything in the ring. And really, when Tully and Arn reached the point where they said, because everything runs its course, and they had a chance to go to New York as the Brainbusters with Bobby the Brain Heenan, and it was right as Crockett was having some internal problems financially. They didn't have the infrastructure to handle that success that big, that quick. And for me, when Tully and Arn left the Horsemen, as I saw them, it was over at that point. And they weren't gone very long that I got a phone call from Tully saying, I don't know what's going on there, and if you're okay, if you're happy or whatever. But at that point, they were running 3 tours up at the WWF at the time, and everything was being booked by Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson, and they were doing the TVs and everything, and they needed help. Terry Garvin was now in the office up there, and he said some people have said some very positive things about you, your attention to detail and what have you, and as long as you've been with Dusty, and if you're interested, you should give him a call. So I called Terry Garvin. He put Pat on the phone, and it was right before Christmas. I went to New York with the woman who ended up my third wife, and to do a little shopping for the holidays, and Vince sent a limousine in to get me into the Marriott at Times Square, and I went to his home in Stamford. And Vince said, I'm meeting you here so that nobody knows that you're here. And he said, I want to offer you a job. I don't want you as a talent. You're going to walk off camera. I'm hiring you as an employee because of what you can contribute creatively, your attention to detail, what have you. And he said, you can do one of 2 things. You can either go back and tell them we had this meeting and use me as leverage to get the best deal you can there, or I'm hoping that you'll consider coming here. And he asked what I wanted, and I gave him a number that he said he would agree to. And the next day I called him back and said, I'm coming. And my contract had run out. And Barnett had kept saying, oh, we need to come in, and Jim Hurd was there and get your contract taken care of. And I said, oh, Jim, let things settle down. I'll come in and take care of it. And so I was basically freelance, and I had my last match, I think, middle of January in Kansas City, a Battle Royal. And the end of February, I took about 6 weeks off, and the end of February, they moved I actually had moved to Dallas. Jimmy had moved the operation to Dallas with the idea of expanding the company, and the company moved me everything I had from Dallas to Stanford, and that was another chapter of my career. And I, went from where I had worked with every promoter in all those regional promotions. In other words, I'd been like a sponge with the Funks in Amarillo, with Eddie Graham, who probably had the greatest influence on me in Florida, being around Dusty, being around Bill Watts, being around the great minds in the wrestling business. Because I started late, I knew that if I was going to have longevity, it wouldn't be, in the ring answering the bell. So that's on my autobiography, From McMahon to McMahon, has a double meaning, because when I started, I was a referee in college with Vince Sr., and now here's his son putting this new empire together, and now I'm being recruited by his son, which is the place that everybody in the business wanted to be. So my career was from McMahon to McMahon.
Very, very good. Very good. I'm sure in a minute we just have a few more questions here. We were going to touch on the time up there in the WWF, working behind the scenes a little bit. But I had one more thing we wanted to ask you. If just a few of our guests, I mentioned we've had Tully and we had Luger on, and we also spoke with Paul Ellering, and we've spoken with Road Warrior Animal, and each of those guys brought up great feud. You and the Horsemen against, Dusty, Nikita, the Road Warriors, and Precious Paul, and it was the beginning and the first ever War Games. And everybody that has been on and talked about it just talked about the electricity and that it was new and it was something fresh. So just wanted to get your take on what you remembered about the War Games first coming about, that idea, the concept of War Games, and then looking back at, those matches as they took place. If I remember right, there was one where you actually suffered kind of a freak injury in one of them, right?
The worst injury of my career, and that was the first one. It was on the 4th of July in the Omni in Atlanta. And so I don't remember the War Games with great fondness, but it was a concept that I'm sure Dusty had. Dusty was a big picture guy, and I was an attention to detail guy. So we complemented each other well, and I could never have done what Dusty did, but I did compliment him well. And the idea of the War Games was, we had, besides Joe, it was the 4 Horsemen with me. I make 5, and then it was Dusty and usually the Road Warriors, and then it could have been Magnum, it could have been Ronnie Garvin, it was whoever was, Luger after he was gone, and then if it was the Road Warriors, it included Ellering, and it just was a unique concept. The first of which was the Omni in Atlanta, and that sold out that building that night, and the match couldn't end, and we somehow had great luck, because there was a toss of the coin to see who would get the advantage after the first 2 went in, and by some miracle we always won the toss, and so we would have the advantage of 2-on-1 for 2 minutes before somebody came in from the other side to even it up, but the match couldn't end until everybody was in there. And virtually every night it was always Dusty and Arn that started it, as Dusty alluded to when he introduced us into the Hall of Fame. And it was very physical. It was a bloodbath, and I was the last one in, and on that particular night, everybody was bloody. Animal had me up on his shoulders, and the 2 rings were together with a cage around both rings together. So they weren't set. The two rings were butted against each other. There was nothing to separate them, and there was a door at each end, and then there was a cage across the top. And so Animal picked me up and on his shoulders, and here's Hawk gone to the top turnbuckle, and I could see what was coming, that he was going to spear me, and I had bad knees to start with. And I said, this is not a place where I want to be. This is not a good-looking picture. And so I was 250 at the time, and as powerful as Animal was, when you have somebody on your shoulders that's 250 pounds, it's hard to control them. And so I tried to get down before Hulk launched, and so right as he launched, I'm tipped over, and Animal lost me, and now I'm coming down head first, and just in that instant, it's like, oh my God, this could be a broken neck. And so I tucked my head, turned my shoulder, and ended up burying my shoulder and separated it, which was probably worse than if I'd have broken it. And immediately the hump, I still have that hump to this day. I was off 6 weeks after that, and I had a choice of either having surgery and have a pin put in there where you wouldn't have known that I had the injury, or immobilize it for 6 weeks, and then I would have that hump on that one side, which I'm reminded every morning when I get up that I still have. But what it did was set the tone, and I think Dusty had said there were, over that period of a year, 14 war games, and all of them did phenomenal business. And I think the level of violence and my injury in the first one then set the tone for the fans of what the war games was all about, what it was going to be about. And but when they imploded the Omni, I cracked a bottle of champagne and celebrated the fact that building collapsed, because it didn't have very fond memories for me, and I find it very difficult to even look at that tape, because it was like I say, I had over 3,000 matches, and it was the worst injury of my career.
JJ, I've seen that match many, many times, and it looks just as brutal as you describe it, and I'm sure a lot more brutal for you yourself experiencing that injury. But you also mentioned earlier about working for Vince McMahon, and you worked there in several different capacities. Of course, talent relations, working on some television. I had the opportunity not too long ago to watch your kayfabe commentaries, where you kind of describe how WWF television worked at the time. So take us through your experiences working in New York and Connecticut. What did you draw out of it? What were some of your more proud accomplishments that you were able to get done there, wearing so many different hats? So if you could, take us through your time working for Vince McMahon in the WWF.
Well, that knowledge was really a body of knowledge that was accumulated from all those years with the regional territories. And in Florida, the Sportatorium was an office. It was an actual physical office. Amarillo never had an office. They used to go to Dory Sr.'s brother, Herman Gust, to his house, and we would meet there one night and a week, or one afternoon a week, and kind of go over matchmaking for the following week and TV and what have you. So Kansas City had an office that I would go to the office every day. So it really, and Fritz von Erich had an office in the Sportatorium. So I just had worn many different hats over the years and had done all aspects of the business. One of the things that I did with Crockett as they grew and started touring nationally was to take care of all the travel and coordinate and work with the people that were setting up the towns so as to keep a control on travel costs. Jimmy ended up buying 2 planes, which was part of the solution and part of the problem at the same time. But the big advantage that I had was being in the business all those years. And so when I first went to work for Vince, it was to sit in, feed ideas. Vince was the final say on everything. So we would have meetings, and Pat and I each carried a big journal, and things would be kicked around, and Vince would have the final say about what he wanted to do. And in those days, he would work a year in advance. He would go ahead to the next WrestleMania and then work backwards to get to there. And it used to be frustrating, because in those days we had Superstars and Challenge. We had 2 syndicated shows, and every 3 weeks we would get together and have to do 3 hours of TV, hold an audience with a dark match, which Hulk had the ability to keep a crowd through an awful long night to tape 3 hours of television, and then give them a match worthy of buying tickets, which was usually Hulk and somebody. But so when I got there, it was like all these things that I had done on a much smaller scale. Here, Vince had an operation that was more corporate, more professional, and he had, where I used to do 10 different things, he had now 10 individuals who had full-time jobs doing what I used to do that were specialists in whatever that aspect of the business was. And they weren't all necessarily wrestling fans either. They just were very good at what they did. And Vince's only demand was that they do watch the program and be familiar with what was happening, whether they were a fan or not. And so Vince was hands-on in every aspect of the operation, and he was a workaholic. And so I would be in the office all week, suit and tie on, and all the creative was done casually on the weekend with Vince, Pat, and I. And when I first went there, Vince didn't want to bring me in because I had such a strong identification with the NWA, with WCW, and he didn't want to immediately thrust me into a situation where I might not be accepted by everybody else. So he wanted to gradually do it. And Vince was very honest. One of the guys who kind of surprised me as I think about it, because he was a guy who, when he would come to the towns, when he barnstormed around, he would always travel with me because I had a huge Dodge van that was all open on the inside, and I would have him over to my house for dinner. And I'm talking about Andre the Giant. And Andre went to Vince and said, "Hey, Vince, what do we need him for? What's he doing here?" And so Vince told me after, he said, "It's not personal." And he said, "Andre has great respect for you, but it's kind of like the people that were there. It's like when you pay for the Yankees, you play for the Yankees and you hate the Red Sox, and vice versa. But there have been cases where guys end up playing for the other team, and they get accepted." And he wanted to make that transition more gradual. And in the midst of all that was the steroid trial. There was a scandal over that Terry Garvin got wrapped up in, and because Terry reported to Pat Patterson, it involved Pat. Pat had been the vice president of talent relations doing payoffs. Terry Garvin got fired, and Pat was not fired but on hiatus and was just disappeared for 6 months. So that's how I took over doing payoffs and ended up being promoted to vice president of talent relations, which I kept until I left there. And then Bruce Pritchard tried it for a while after I left, and that wasn't what he did best. It didn't work out, and Jim Ross moved in, did an excellent job. And then after Jim Ross, John Laurinaitis, and then, of course, now Triple H is doing it. But I kind of transitioned as I became more and more involved with talent relations, involved with payoffs, and still was involved with creative, but not to the degree I was when I first went there. So it was Vince could be tough to work for. He was a guy who would tell you that he wanted you to be honest with him and tell him exactly what your opinion was. But when guys would tell him what their opinion was, if it wasn't what Vince's thought process was, he made it tough sometimes to get into a dialogue with him, because some guys would then all of a sudden think, "Hey, I don't want him to get mad and fire me because I got a family to feed." So, and most guys would then take one or two steps backwards, and a lot of it was Vince hearing ultimately what Vince wanted to hear. And Vince knew that a lot of the old-timers, when I first got there, it was Jay Strongbow and George Steele and Rene Goulet and Tony Gurria and Nick Bockwinkel. And these were guys who their allegiance really was to Vince Sr. And I think Vince knew that. And over a period of time, he eventually weeded those guys out, because he knew that though it was never said, that in their hearts they all had this, kind of great feeling for Vince Sr., and that Vince Jr., in spite of his success, wasn't a guy that they all looked up to in the same way. Different personalities, much more aggressive. The only two guys that I was around who held their ground and would speak their mind to Vince and not be intimidated by him were Pat Patterson and Jerry Briscoe. And it's because both of them had money in the bank or money in tin cans buried in the backyard, and I think both of them, if Vince said, "Hey, that's it, you're out of here," they wouldn't have had to have a benefit for either of them. But they were the two guys that always spoke openly and honestly with Vince. Not that I didn't, but I just never allowed myself to get into that. I said what I thought, fed my ideas. Some were good, some were bad. Vince took credit for everything that was good, never took the heat for anything that wasn't. And as a head of talent relations, it's kind of like the press secretary for the president. Your job is to catch the hand grenades. The president nobody ever gets near him. And I had success in the business and longevity, and I think the reason was because all those years I was on the road. I could talk to talent, and though I might have been the bearer of bad news, I had been in their shoes. So I always thought ahead of time, okay, if I'm him and the bad news is coming, how is the best way and the most sensitive way to do it? And back in those days, they would send a letter out from a lawyer written in legalese, and that would come in a FedEx envelope basically saying that your contract is not rolling over. Basically saying you're done. And guys would get that in the mail, a FedEx envelope delivered, which plane tickets oftentimes or things would come that way. And I changed the process that before any letter ever went out, and I did the same thing when I got to WCW, that I would call in advance to whoever it was and have a personal one-on-one conversation. And it was, look, this is not personal, and you know that this is my job, and this is the toughest part of my job and the part that I hate the most, but I just want you to know in advance that a FedEx envelope is going to come, and it's not good news. So now the guy's kind of been prepared for the fact it's coming. And I said, you can think about it overnight and think about how you can kind of break the news to your family so it's not devastating for you. Give some thought about what you want to do from this point. And for the most part, guys respected me because I respected them.
Sure. But there's a lot to be said for that. It shows a lot of character, rather than just kind of dropping the bomb on them. They at least, know in advance what's going on there.
The nature of the business is that you're never going to be everybody's friend. Not everybody's going to like you, but through 40-some years, over 5 decades, I'm sure there were people, that, enemies in the business or guys, at least for a period of time, that didn't understand. And one of the great examples was Mick Foley. Mick was in Atlanta and came up there, and when new talent came in, and he met at the office, and the meeting was Vince McMahon, Mick Foley, and myself. And at the time, Vince always was kind of enamored with that look of a Hulk Hogan, Lex Luger, Ultimate Warrior, that body type. And that was not what Mick Foley was all about. And Vince had absolutely zero interest in him. And, of course, I was the one that then had to tell them after they left, well, we'll be back in touch with you. And I would always write the letter that, that it was more a matter of timing, that right now we just don't have the right spot for you. We want to keep you in mind, and said in a way to not be demeaning to whoever it was. And when Mick Foley wrote his first book, he wrote in there a chapter that he didn't get hired the first time around because he thought I didn't like him, and that was the reason that Vince didn't hire him. Because when you think about it, it was much easier to blame me for anything and everything where was the upside when you think about it for anybody ever blaming Vince for any negative thing that ever happened, whether it was not getting hired, a bad payoff, or whatever it was. And it was at a fan fest in Charlotte years after that. I don't remember exactly how many years, and it was the first time I saw Mick Foley. And I walked in, Mick, how are you? I said, do you have a couple minutes that you and I could speak privately? And we went off in a corner and for about 30 minutes talked. And at the end of the conversation, the light went on, and Mick realized that I was the messenger, that it had nothing to do with me, that decisions weren't made based on my opinion. If anything, I oftentimes wasn't asked, but I was the bearer of bad news. And Mick said, I'm going to write another book. And he said, because I asked Mick if he would sign my copy. I had the book, and asked him to sign the copy for me. And the message that he wrote in there, and Scott Teal photocopied it, and it's on one of the pages in my book, where he said, I hope you enjoyed my book, and if you just go around the comments that were made on page number, whatever it was, and I promise you that the next time I write a book, I will set the record straight. And so he did. He wrote a book after that, and basically kind of made things right with him and I, and we've been good friends ever since.
That's very good stuff. He was so Foley was up there for a meeting prior to when he came in as Mankind, you're saying then?
Yes. Yeah, he came up the first time, and Vince had absolutely no interest in him. And it wasn't until later, when Jim Ross was in the position, that Jim Ross just kind of made it his personal thing and put his career on the line, basically to say, this guy's going to draw money. And Vince's attitude was, well, you're wrong, and you're going to see, and it could cost you your job. And, of course, it ended up he was, again, one of the huge success stories there.
Wow, I never realized that he had that, that he had that initial meeting there that didn't pan out. That's interesting.
Yep.
All right, well, we just have a couple more for you. We thank you for taking this time out of your schedule to be on Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly. JJ Dillon, legendary manager of the Original Horsemen, member of the
Pro. Corrected, the leader of the Four Horsemen.
Leader of the Four Horsemen, excuse me. Member of both the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and the WWE Hall of Fame. And so to move along, we're next stop that you would make after that time in WWF, you would, in or around 1996, go down south and go to work for World Championship Wrestling and Eric Bischoff. The company then was certainly about ready to launch to heights that it hadn't seen before. And you would be there to see that. And also kind of the unthinkable to us as wrestling fans, by 2001, would run its course and run its last show and be bought out by Vince McMahon. So would you take us through the ride coming in there to WCW around 96, those last few years of the company, working with Eric as opposed to what you were used to the few years prior, working with Vince, and the whole explosion there with the era of the NWO and Goldberg, and then moving along, there were so many, kind of almost like a roller coaster down there from what we've heard from different people. They brought in the WWF writers, and that didn't work, and then the overall atmosphere and your thoughts when it was finally closing.
Well, I devote a whole chapter to my time at the WWF, and I didn't leave on the best of terms. I'm one of the few people who walked into Vince's office, and it was a Friday afternoon, and I had my resignation letter prepared, and I had several reasons, some of which I can talk about, some of which I can't, and some of it's explained in that chapter. But I met at Vince's house face to face when he hired me, and felt that I owed it to him to. When I made the decision that I didn't want to stay there any longer, or couldn't stay there any longer, that I, wanted to give him that message face to face, and that happened on a Friday afternoon. It complicated the situation because Shane got married the next day, and all the family was in town, and it was the makings of what could have been a very ugly situation, and it wasn't really about that. It was something where just things pile. I had made the decision a year and a half before that I couldn't stay there any longer, but he had convinced me that was my last stop, that I should buy a house, and there's a lot to the story that's all laid out in that chapter. But anyway, finally sold the house, and when I did, when the house closed, I left a week later. Did not have another job. I had twins that were not quite 4 years old, one of whom had special needs, and I had a baby that was like 2 years old. And after the sale of the house, which I took a loss on, I think at closing I had about $20,000 to my name and no job. And as a matter of principle, I couldn't stay there another day, even wait till Monday after the wedding. So I ended up going to Atlanta with the idea in mind. I knew Jerry Jarrett and had been instrumental in Jerry coming up there when it looked like there was a possibility that Vince, if he was found guilty, because I had worked around Jarrett, I got the two of them together thinking that Jerry was the one guy who had experience and been successful at doing everything that Vince did, but on a smaller scale. And so Jarrett was a possibility, and then I thought, well, I don't know, WCW, if they would have interest, and if not, maybe I could go to Orlando with all of the entertainment things down there and be able to, find something. I'm right here in the middle. And I called Tony Schiavone. He arranged a meeting with Eric Bischoff, who I'd never met, never talked to, and got caught in an accident on the freeway and was about 10 minutes late getting there, which he made a comment about. But my first impression of Eric Bischoff was I expected someone who would look at me as someone who had had all this vast experience and had just come from almost 8 years with, the top competitor and the place where he wanted to be. And I thought, well, he's going to want to, and I'm not talking about divulging proprietary information. I'm just talking about just conceptually, what they were doing, how things were done, what have you. And all he wanted to talk about was how much longer can Vince stay in business. I've got him on the ropes. It can't be much longer. And and I'm sitting there, and I'm not about to tell him that, well, this is the third generation right now with Vince who eats and sleeps the wrestling business and understands that as simplistic as wrestling appears to be, and is really, it also can be complex in terms of being able to run the business and run it profitably. And so I just listened to Eric, and Time Warner had just merged with AOL, so there was a freeze. So for the first month, I actually was a consultant before they actually hired me. And as I look back, I realized that the powers to be at the North Tower of the suits at TBS, because I was so high profile and a right-hand man to Vince McMahon, I guess it would have been difficult for Bischoff to explain with me on the open market why he wouldn't have hired me. And as I think back, it's almost like he had to hire me. Now, he then could look at me in one of two ways. He could either look at me as a resource that he could tap into with all the wealth of experience, not only with the 8 years with Vince, but prior to that, or he could also look at me as somebody who was a threat to him, because after my experience and after meeting him, I was the one person there that knew that he knew nothing, and that it was smoke and mirrors, and that he had carried coffee for Vern Gagne, and he was great at selling himself, always was, much better at it than I ever could be. And that's how he got the job. And the difference was there was no Vince McMahon looking over his shoulder that could gauge how successful or unsuccessful anything that he was doing was at the time. And so he brought talent in, gave him guaranteed contracts. He took the production budget for TV went live, and if you looked at how the budget for production for TV from week to week, I mean, it went through the roof. And it was a television company that knew nothing about wrestling. All they looked at was ratings, and they weren't looking at pay-per-view, they weren't looking at live events, and their thinking was, well, we're a television company, and if it's doing ratings, more people are watching, eventually all these other things are going to fall into place, which at that time the structure of the business was that it wasn't that way. Vince was the one that pioneered licensing and marketing, and some of the guys made more money from selling their toys and dolls than they did wrestling in some given years. And of course, they had nothing like that. They were having to start from nothing. So my relationship from the beginning was kind of strained with Eric, only because instead of looking at me as a potential resource that could have helped him take it to the next level, I think he really looked at me as somebody who was a threat, that he kept me at arm's length. And so a lot of things happened, and my one ally there, and you mentioned Kevin Sullivan, who is a brilliant guy who understands the business and has always been very successful. And he and I, and you know, the call came about Russo, who wanted out from New York, and I thought, well, I didn't know at that point how really instrumental he was in any of the success, and he wanted to bring his partner with him, and I set the meeting up, and we met out at the airport in Atlanta, and it ended up, you know, they hired him, and when he got there, I think Vince Russo had an agenda of being probably bitter that everybody thought, well, it was really Vince McMahon who monitored everything that he did, that it wasn't really what Vince Russo had done on his own. And I think he came there with an idea of proving everybody wrong. So it was a very, very difficult situation. And when Kevin Sullivan would say, are you watching this TV? Do you see what's happening? You know, you know, the logic is gone. There's no sense to what's happening. There's no continuity. There's the amount of wrestling is now down to nothing. And we tried to set up a meeting with Vince to say, look, we need to find a happy medium in between. And at that meeting, Vince Russo put his back against the wall and said, it's my way or the highway. And so that drew a divide between Vince Russo and I, and after that, there was nobody in the North Tower who they looked and thought all was well. I draw an analogy to if I was sitting in the captain's quarters of the Titanic, and the captain's busy and they're talking and they're proud of this magnificent ship that they say is the biggest and best ever built and is indestructible, and I look down at the radar screen and I see this iceberg ahead, and I'm trying to get everybody's attention to say, hey, you either need to slow down, change course, do something, and I'm being ignored until they struck the iceberg and the ship sunk. And that's basically what happened at WCW.
Sure, and actually Kevin spoke to that as well. Well, JJ, I just had one more question for you, and then I was going to shoot it back over to Steve. He does a little thing to wrap us up here. Again, thank you for spending the time with us here tonight on Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly. Lastly, what we wanted to talk with you about is both of your inductions into the respective Hall of Fames. The Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, which is located up in Amsterdam, New York, and then obviously with Four Horsemen reuniting for a couple of years back, the WWE Hall of Fame. I just wanted to get your take on what that meant to you, both occasions. First, being inducted to the Hall up in Amsterdam, and then also to the, brought back together with you, Rick, Arn, Tully, and Barry for the WWE's Hall of Fame.
Well, the WWE came first, and I have to be honest that when the call came, I was shocked. And actually, Barry Windham, I had gone to see Barry up at a fan festival type of thing, a small one up in Legends of the Ring that's been doing for 10 years, and they do a great show up there. And Barry was there, and I'm about a 2-hour drive from there or less, and I went up there basically to see Barry and spent a little time with him. And he made the comment about, boy, that's pretty exciting, isn't it? It's going to really change things for us. And I kind of looked at him, and he looked at me, and I guess he could tell by the look on my face that I had no idea what he's talking about. And he pulled me off to the corner, and he said, the Horsemen are being inducted into the Hall of Fame, and it's so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and it's you. And that's what Vince wants. And, of course, if you read my book and read the circumstances under which I left there, it kind of like the screw job in Montreal. If you were taking odds in Vegas that Bret Hart would ever have worked for Vince again after spitting in his face at ringside and then punching him in the back of the arena, the odds, I think, to me would have been comparable. And it wasn't till I got the contract, till I got there. I didn't know how I would be received by Linda McMahon, who the weekend that Shane got married, I'm told, was in tears, and it was a bad scene. As it ended up, it was a wonderful weekend. My 4 children were flown down. We were given first-class treatment. Vince presented me along with everybody else with my ring, and I didn't know what to say. I had met with Stephanie briefly before that. She was very gracious, and with Linda. And with Vince, I remember looking at him, and I said, Vince, I can't tell you how much this means to me and my family. And he looked at me and put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, we had some great times together, didn't we, JJ? And that was the extent of our conversation. And it was basically the perfect ending to the situation, and we went on from there. Perception-wise, the average wrestling fan, when you talk about Hall of Fame, WWE Hall of Fame is what they think of. So it definitely validated everything that I did throughout my career. But at the same time, a year later, I was on the ballot and inducted into the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame up in Amsterdam, and there wasn't 15,000 people there. There was maybe 250 or 500 in the banquet hall of a Holiday Inn hotel, and there was no mega sporting event the next day with 70,000 people, but there was a process that I'm aware of because I'm on the board up there, and I know that the founder, Tony Villano, has a process by which the people it's an honor just to have your name put on the ballot. And then to actually have that ballot go out to people in the business who are already Hall of Famers, former world champions, who are respected historians, and then to be selected by vote to go in, to me, is the greatest honor that you can have. I don't care what you do in life, if you're recognized by your peers for your body of work and your accomplishments. So I wear the ring with equal pride, and yet I'm not naive enough to think that in terms of perception that the WWE Hall of Fame ring is the one that they all look at first. And even though the other one appraised for 1.5 times as much as that WWE Hall of Fame ring, I guess I look at it as, and I can't explain it, but I've got the best of both worlds. It was something that I never ever thought would happen, and it did happen. And then to be recognized by my peers after all those years in the business, and I'm the luckiest guy in the world.
We're here with JJ Dillon at WGD Weekly. Just a couple of more questions here for you, JJ. Actually, just a couple of names I wanted to get out there. We're going to do some name association. I know that you had mentioned one of the guys on my list here during our interview. We're going to get to him in a minute. But I wanted to open up the name association with a guy that you actually had the opportunity to manage, and I've asked a couple of other guests on our show about what it was like to work with him. He was one of my favorite guys growing up as a kid. He was so intimidating and actually made you scared. Talk to us a little bit about the time you spent managing and working with Abdullah the Butcher. What was it like working with the Butcher on a nightly basis?
Great talent. Enjoyed working with him. He went to Japan a couple times when I was managing him in Atlanta, where I had been in limbo because he was the only one I was managing, and he worked it out with Baba and with the office for me to go on the tour with him. And so I have great respect for him Again, he's from Windsor, Ontario, Canada, right across the river from Detroit. So he was exposed to the Sheik, and I think the Sheik was always his role model, only he was a lot bigger, a lot wilder. And Abdullah was, I still to this day regard him a friend, and I know he's had some health issues recently, and I saw him a few months ago in Rome, Georgia, and he had some surgery coming up, and I've not talked to him since, but he asked me if I would send a picture down to put on the wall in his restaurant, which I did, and have not talked to him since, but really one of the great talents in the business, and he was from the era where there was a need for the wrestling manager, because it was best when Abdullah stood there, and his style was such that he needed that spokesperson, much the same as Paul. I watched last night on Raw. Paul Heyman did one of the greatest interviews that maybe I've ever heard, and I have so much respect for him. He is one of the great managers of all time. And there was Brock Lesnar standing there that never said a word, and Paul Heyman was the best example that I could think of what the meaningful role of the manager is, and I couldn't have done it any better than he did last night.
Yeah, Paul Lee has certainly transcended time and space with his managerial capabilities spanning over 30 years there. Not as long as you, though, JJ. Done a great job yourself. Now, let's talk a little bit about another guy that you had the opportunity to manage. And if you're not familiar with classic pro wrestling, he was around WWF, WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 2, a really good program with Andre the Giant. But talk to us a little bit more about Big John Studd.
Again, a great guy, and got to know him. He passed away way too young. I don't go to very many funerals because I tend to want to remember people as they were when they were living, and at the time they needed a representative to go, and Howard Finkel and I attended his funeral, so I got a chance to be around his family. But he was, and when I got my break in the Maritimes, he was up there wrestling for Emil Dupre, in separate promotions up in that same area of the country. So I'd known him for a long time. There was only one Andre the Giant, but John Studd, I think, made a lot of money just being a legitimate challenger against Andre. And when Andre wasn't there, he was a stud. He was very well named.
You know, one of the first angles I can remember was the program with Studd and Andre about the Body Slam Challenge, and of course came to fruition at WrestleMania 1 with Andre getting the victory and attempting to throw that money out to the crowd. Of course, another great manager, one of the greatest of all time, Bobby Heenan, comes in, steals that money like he should. Great character there. Now, in your career, I don't think that you had the opportunity to work with Andre in WWF. Did you actually have any opportunities throughout the earlier part of your career to work with Andre?
No, never. And in fact, when Andre would come in, he would usually come in for a week. Sometimes the worst riot that I was ever in my entire career was I was managing Rupert Bernard in Australia, and Andre came in for the week, and Sydney was on Friday night, Melbourne was on Saturday. So Andre stayed for 9 days so that we got 2 appearances out of Sydney and 2 out of Melbourne. And I talked Larry O'Day into doing something where Brute wrestled against Andre on the Friday night, and he had him in the bear hug, and I rolled in, took my shoe off, splat Andre, bell rings, DQ. He drops to one knee and comes up with blood running down his face, and Brute took one punch, I took one punch, and we rolled out to leave. And all the Greeks and Italians and people in Sydney, Australia, did not want to see us leave. They wanted Andre to get his due justice at that point, and it was the worst riot that I've ever been in my life. So I was around Andre a lot, and like I said, I had a big one of those long Dodge vans, and I had it converted, and I didn't have seats behind. I had 2 captain's chairs in the front, and the whole rest of it was carpeted and just a sofa in the back. And Andre used to love to travel with me because there was 2 side doors, and he would get in there and he would lay down and be able to sleep the whole trip. And usually I would manage to get him one night, bring him over to the house, and give him a home-cooked meal. And we were in Dallas one night and came over to the house, and there was my second wife, and made him a great meal. And he said, tonight, boss, he called everybody boss. After the match, boss, he said, we go out. You don't say no to Andre. So he wanted to go to the Playboy Club in Dallas. So my wife and I and Andre, after the match, go to the Playboy Club, which was on the second floor of this building. And we go in, and it was warm in there. We go upstairs, and the way it was laid out, you came in the front entrance, and then you went around the corner. It wasn't all like one big room. And, have a few drinks. And so then Andre says to my wife, want to dance. So he picks her up, and they go out and dance. And as they're dancing, it's hot in there. Andre unbuttons his shirt, takes his shirt off, wings it around, and heaves the shirt. Well, the bouncers came over and basically told him to put his shirt back on, and he basically told the bouncers, to stick it where the sun doesn't shine. Well, we stayed. Everything was going well, and all of a sudden, Andre is kind of oblivious to everything. And where I'm sitting, I can see the floor, the dance floor, and everything that's going on over there. And I can also see, I have a point of vision to the front door. And all of a sudden, here's about 6 cops, all dressed up with their riot gear. And then I can just see the pantomime of the 2 bouncers that were big guys to start with, and they're the one guy's holding his arm way up in the air as if saying there's this big giant in here, and and he's pantomiming everything, and these guys are shaking their head yes. The 6 cops walk around the corner, saw Andre, looked at each other, made a U-turn, walked around to the front door, patted the bouncer on the back, and down the stairs they went and left.
That is great. More ribs, riots, and road stories with Andre the Giant being the focal point. We can't get enough of that on our show, that's for sure.
That is a true story.
A good Andre story never disappoints, that's for sure. So thanks for that. We're going to move on to our next guy, who you mentioned earlier. You actually worked a program with him in your singles career. He had a great run against the Four Horsemen as well as a babyface. One of the most entertaining guys. I loved him growing up as a kid. I know the Scum did too. Captain Redneck, Dick Murdoch.
Oh, my goodness. If there was... I went to Amarillo, and as I said earlier, I basically worked a year program with Dick Murdoch. And Dick was, he would have been a great, great world champion, but he never worked out. He just was a typical big, raw-boned kid, almost like a farm boy. He had a little tummy on him. Not he wasn't fat, but just he wasn't one that trained in the gym. But he could probably lick anybody in that town. And he made me. Dick was probably, I don't know, 6'6", probably 280, 6'5", 280. He was big, and I was at that point a little over 6 foot, probably 225, 2.25 soaking wet. And I'm the heel, and he's the baby face. What's wrong with that picture? But he made those people believe that I was the baddest person in the world. And we had all kinds of matches. Well, I never went out in Amarillo and ever put myself in a situation where I'd be in a bar and somebody was going to come up and challenge me, that I'd be put in an embarrassing situation. And Dickie would go to he lived in those bars with those rednecks. And they would all, the first one, they would make a comment to him about, couldn't understand how I could kick his ass. And he would tell them, oh, you don't? Well, let me tell you something. He's a badass son of a bitch, and then he turned around and kicked the shit out of the guy that asked him. So I had the reputation in town of being this badass son of a gun that never went out anywhere and never had to prove it. Dickie was one of the greatest performers that I ever was around, worked with, or saw in this business. And unfortunately, he was so talented that he made it look easy. and he had fun when he was doing it. And I think that drove a lot of the promoters crazy. And maybe it was the reason why he never was a world champion, because they were afraid that he wouldn't be serious about it. And he died way too young, and he was inducted into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Every year I vote for him with the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame ballot. I get one every year, and I always circle Dick Murdoch. And I always hear Meltzer say that the guys that were in the business, always, that's where all the big votes come from, but it's the people outside the business that really knew him that never give him enough support to get him in terms of their Hall of Fame. So the fact that the guys that were in the business that knew him and knew what a great talent he was finally voted him in last year, and to the point that Terry Funk made it a thing to come to Amsterdam, New York, to be the one to induct Dick into the Hall of Fame, where he richly deserved to be.
You know, that's really, really great to hear. We had Jim Cornette on our program a couple of times, and he votes for Dick Murdoch to get into the Hall of Fame every year. So it's great to see that finally come to fruition, his rightful spot in the Hall of Fame. And certainly, hopefully one day, the boys up in New York and Connecticut can go back and look at Dick Murdoch's body of work and put him in the WWE Hall of Fame as well. I'm certain that he's well deserving. But we have one more guy we wanted to talk about. I'm not sure how much you actually worked with him, but there are some overtones of talking about him in this discussion. So I wanted to get your thoughts on working with or around Cowboy Bill Watts.
You know, I wasn't around Bill a whole lot. When I went to Florida from Amarillo, Bill was just finishing up, and he had a phenomenal run as the creative guy and matchmaker in Florida, a phenomenal run. And so I was actually in the ring one time with him in a tag match. It's the only time I was ever in the ring with Bill. And I think it was more because of he was a lot closer to Dusty. And later on, Dusty went over to New Orleans for 3 days and took me with him. And when I came in there, and I knew Ernie Ladd from when I first broke into the business. But Bill, spoke extremely highly of me to everybody that was there that night, which really made me feel good. I think I wrestled Jim Duggan. But the few times that I've been around Bill, I think Bill was there was a lineage. I think you could even go back to Dory Funk Sr., then Eddie Graham, because Eddie Graham worked in Amarillo too, and that certain genius that those old timers had, and I'm talking about Dory Sr., I'm talking about Eddie Graham, rubbed off on Dory, it rubbed off on Terry, it rubbed off on Dusty, it rubbed off on Bill Watts, and it rubbed off on me, certainly. The one thing that was different from me was that if Dusty or Terry Funk or somebody went in to book, there was a circle of people that were kind of their guys that when they went in would come in with them. And I was never positioned like that. So when I went in, it wasn't that I didn't have the experience, didn't have the background, but I didn't have my crew of guys. And that was part of the learning experience too, just the same as when I went to the Maritimes with TV. But I was around Bill for the weekend up in Amsterdam because he was inducted into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame as part of the same group that I was. There were El Santo was inducted, Dick Murdoch was inducted, two people that richly deserved to be there. Jody Hamilton, who deserved to be there. Sadly, Tom Ernesto had passed on, but there were 6 living inductees in the class of 2013. Joyce Grable was there, and she really had some tough health issues to deal with this year. Tito Santana, who deserved to be in. Dick Murdoch, of course, wasn't there. Baron Raschke, Jody Hamilton, one of the original assassins, and Bill Watts. So I had a chance to be around Bill on a private dinner on Friday and the deal Saturday, and I've talked to him a couple times on the phone, and I was around Ernie Ladd a lot, and Bill thought the world of Ernie Ladd, so we had that connection too. But I have great respect for Bill Watts. A lot of guys said he was tough to work for, but in that era of the business, you had to run it with an iron fist to be successful, and the proof of that is with what happened in WCW. That the minute that you had somebody who was manipulated, that gave out guaranteed contracts, who it's the nature of the guys to get everything that they can unless somebody says no, and that's eventually what put them out of business.
Sure. Well, JJ, that about wraps up our time here this week on Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly. We want to just can't thank you enough. What a thrill as fans of your work growing up and watching as a fan. It's just fantastic. We appreciate you taking this much time to speak with us here. It took me a couple hours here, but I think I'll get it right this time. It's the leader of the original Four Horsemen, JJ Dillon.
And you could say the original Four Horsemen too. That's great. And I'm very proud of that. I think that kind of sets me apart from everybody else. And I encourage everybody to check out JJDillon.com. My website was originally up and running when my autobiography came out, and it was recently revamped by Scott Teal, who published my autobiography and was my co-author. He's a great writer. He's written a lot of great books. He's a respected historian, and we've become very good friends as a result of it. And I plugged the book, but the book was never sold in bookstores. It was sold either through the website or at my personal appearances. And the original printing of the book in 2005 was 3,000, and right now there are between 30 and 40 left. So,
well, now for our listeners that might want it, are those 30 or 40 still left through JJDillon.com?
So whoever orders them gets them. And I started out initially the first year. I told Scott, because people have to do a little work to find them, I'd like to offer to sign copies of them at no charge. And if they want them personalized, I'll do that. And I was going to do it for the first year, and I've done it for the entire lot. It was sold on Amazon for a while, which they weren't structured such a way to be able to offer signed copies. So every now and then somebody will come up with an appearance with one that they've got in hand that I guess they got off of Amazon, and I always sign it. So at this point, legitimately, there are 30 to 40 left, and you either have to go to JJDillon.com or go to Crowbar Press. And when they're gone, they're gone. That's it. There won't be another printing. And like I say, I do plan to do another book, but we're talking probably 2 years down the line. And I'm very proud of that book. I would say you can look and read about the chapters, read about what's in it, and it tells you a lot. But if you go to the review segment, when you get to the part about the book, and read the comments that were made by people who are either in the business or people who purchased the book and then shared their thoughts, I think that does more to tell you what it's all about. And it's basically, I'm very proud of the fact that it's been highly praised by people in the business, and including the historians. That and you got to look at it that I started as a fan in the mid-'50s, late 50s, not too long after wrestling had started on television, black and white TV. So I was there either as a referee through the Bruno Sammartino era. I was there through the territory days. I think I wrestled in 44 of the 50 states and wrestled not every territory. I don't think I ever got to California for any length of time, but I made it a point to get to Oregon to work for Don Owens, and I got to Calgary to work a week for Stu Hart. So I worked for most of them because that was, again, part of the things that I wanted to do. So I had a unique perspective on the inside of the business through all the changes that came about as a result of how cable television changed the landscape. Worked for Vince McMahon for, like I say, almost 8 years, and then sadly, my career ended with the last 5 years with WCW. But it's kind of like a Wrestling 101 textbook if you want to understand how the business functioned and how it made money, and from a very unique perspective. And if not, even if you're not a wrestling fan, it's about a 16-year-old kid that fell in love with wrestling and had a dream and lived his dream. And now I look in the mirror some days and I see 2 Hall of Fame rings, and I think, God, when it first started and I dreamed of being a wrestler, if somebody said Hall of Fame, that was Cooperstown in baseball. And now I've got 2 rings. So, like I say, and again, one thing that I neglected to say was, yes, you needed desire to want to be in this business, which I had, and you needed help, and I had help from so many people along the way. And a good thing about the book that allowed me to single out who those people were. And then the other thing is that some people have ability, have help from people, but there's the luck factor of just sometimes being in the right place at the right time, and that's how the Horsemen came together. And I've had the good fortune of having been lucky, of being in the right place at the right time. And as I look back over the length of my career, I'm so fortunate that with the talent that I was blessed with, that I've enjoyed such great success. And it isn't because of my talent or that I'm so great, it's the fans. And I never forget or miss an opportunity to say that if it was not for the fans, who are the greatest fans in the world, the wrestling fans, the most loyal in the world, if it wasn't for the fans, there would have been no JJ Dillon, there would have been no 4 Horsemen, there probably wouldn't have been any professional wrestling either. So I would like to finish with this opportunity to say a personal thank you to all the great fans throughout the world.
Well, that's great. And again, thanks for being with us tonight, JJ. We really appreciate it. If you're listening in, hurry up and get over to jjdillon.com. That's Wrestlers Are Like Seagulls from McMahon to McMahon, JJ's autobiography. Limited copies left, so hustle up and get over there. And JJ, again, we hope you have a great night, and you're welcome back here on Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly anytime.
Well, I have really enjoyed it, and I appreciate your having me on as a guest. Wrestling's Glory Days, Wrestling, you guys have actually, prepared and had some great questions, and I never lost that passion for wrestling, and that's where it all started, and I still have it, and I love spending time like this with people like you who are informed and ask great questions and to talk about wrestling. A lot of things have changed, but the one thing that'll never change is the wonderful memories, and that's basically what we've talked about on this edition.
And a great walk down memory lane it was. JJ, thanks once again for joining us. Enjoy your evening, and hopefully we'll be able to speak again real soon.
Well, thank you, and we'll do it again sometime down the line.
Hello, it's hardcore legend Mick Foley, and you are listening to Wrestling Glory Days Weekly. Thanks.
All right, what a history lesson, Steve. I mean, geez, I can't get enough. Honestly, 2 hours, it seemed like about 2 minutes to listening to that. I mean, I know we had to do it as a 2-parter here for the listeners just to make it reasonable. But honestly, I know I speak for you too when I say when it's someone who's that well-versed in the history of pro wrestling and actually lived it and went through it all, I could listen to JJ Dillon all night.
Oh, yeah, Scum, absolutely. I definitely listen to JJ anytime. Very well-rounded individual. Been through a lot in the industry. Held so many different positions in different companies. That's really testament to what the promoters thought of his abilities, his ability to adapt to the wrestling industry as the wrestling industry grew. And as I'm thinking about it here, not only was it a great interview, like you said, a 2-parter, and I know sometimes that's a little bit difficult for our listeners to catch everything all in one sitting, so wanted to thank you for bearing with us. But it was such a great interview that I thought that 2+ hours, and I know you agree, Scum, was a little too much to offer to our listeners all at once, so we decided to break it up. But also something else I wanted to bring to the table here real quick. When we did our ultimate tribute to the Ultimate Warrior, J.J. Dillon's testimonials was really, really detailed and really, really interesting to listen to. And kind of surprising, you don't put J.J. Dillon and the Ultimate Warrior together every day.
Sure. And yeah, that was a unique, and JJ worked with the Warrior. I wouldn't even have realized that, but during that brief stint that Warrior had back in '96 when he reappeared in the WWF briefly, only for a few months there, but JJ was the head of talent relations at that point. And yeah, I felt, because when we were doing the Warrior interview, it was shortly after we had spoke with JJ initially, and for him to call up and give that long of a testimonial and that heartfelt of a testimonial after the length of this interview just shows, I mean, that the respect, and it's flattering. I know I speak for you when I say this, Steve, when someone of the stature of a James J. Dillon, a Hall of Famer in every sense of the word in the world of professional wrestling, to show that much respect and to give us that time, it's humbling at times to have that. And yeah, JJ Dillon, just a fantastic guy, legend in the business without question, and just a fantastic career. And yeah, we can't thank him enough. Love to have him back. I'm sure as we get closer and we can lead on a little bit more as to our new venture that we've been speaking of, the third man, kind of like the NWO. Remember when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash showed as the outsiders and no one knew at Bash at the Beach who's the third man gonna be, and kind of that's kind of the scenario that we're looking at here. And that as much as we want to tell you, we can't really speak at this point as to who the third man is gonna be with Steve and the Scum.
Yeah, brother, we can't quite divulge who our third party's gonna be quite yet, but he is gonna come on our show hopefully between now and the end of the season, like we've been talking about, to reveal who he is and what we're going to do. But trust me when I say he will bring a whole new dimension to Steve and the Scum and Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly, so we can't wait for that. JJ Dillon was a very gracious guest, and he was really nice to meet in person. We cultivated a relationship with him back in Winston-Salem at WrestleCade, amongst many others. So, it was just nice to see this interview from start to finish, from meeting the guy to having discussions to getting the interview out to everybody. Really cool stuff there. But moving back to our new co-host here, Scum, we can't give away any information, not nary a clue.
Well, again, I think without divulging too much information, I think that we can say a few things about this gentleman. And as Bobby Heenan might say, and I use that term loosely, actually, I believe that was the gorilla that used to say that, aimed at Heenan. But either way, the classic Monsoon Heenan team, if I could steal a line from, I certainly will. But this man...
we stole the whole first season from him.
Yeah, absolutely. Will you please?
Give me a break.
We got rules and regulations here. You're totally out of control. But either way, it's safe to say that this guy was a man whose career in the wrestling industry spanned many decades. He worked in every major company, every major territory. He worked on the camera, off the camera, in the ring, out of the ring as in a managerial role. This is certainly someone who will bring an entirely new dimension to the show, Steve. That is for sure.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Scum. I can't wait to get this guy on our show to make the big announcement, and I can't wait for season 3.
Me either. And just a reminder before we leave the air here, next week, WWE Hall of Famer Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff will be here with Steven the Scum. We have the Russian Nightmare Nikita Koloff coming up on the horizon. We have the first time ever together for an interview on air, Kevin Sullivan, Jim Cornette, the 1-year anniversary show of WGD Weekly with Steven the Scum. And if I could give maybe the most pointed hint that I can to take us off the air as to that third man, as to who Steven the Scum will be joining heading into season 3. All I could say is you may possibly run into this man if you were to do Steven the Scum wrong and we were to decide to sick our old friend Jim Brunzell on you to score with and hit you with a drop kick straight to hell.
Well, you can't get a better clue than that now, folks, can you? We'll see you next week.